So today, I'm going to talk about a very important topic if you happen to own a Land Rover Discovery 2 with a Rover V8. You see, with a Discovery 2, one of the most important things is to not let it overheat. I repeat, don't let it overheat. It's true. If you want these motors to last a long time, the key is to keep them cool. And there are a number of ways you can do that. But before I get into any of those ways, the number one most important thing you need to do if you own a Land Rover Discovery 2, get an ultra gauge. Just Google it. Google ultra gauge and buy one. They're 80 bucks. I get nothing for telling you to do this. The reason for this is that little gauge on the side of your Discovery, the little temperature gauge, is literally a dummy light. The bottom means cold, middle means not cold, top means you're screwed, you're overheating. So it's totally useless. There's no variation in that gauge. So the number one thing you gotta do if you buy a Discovery 2 is buy an ultra gauge. This little computer device thingy, it plugs into your OBD2 port and it gives you a live readout of all kinds of fun stuff. But the number one most important thing, it gives you the readout of your engine temperature. And if you don't do this, you'll have no idea where your engine's running. And these things are getting pretty long in the tooth. They're pretty old and the cooling systems can be clogged. So there's a good chance your cooling system isn't running optimally. One of the key reasons to keep a Discovery 2 cool is head gaskets. These things will blow through head gaskets, which isn't the end of the world, but nobody wants to change head gaskets if you don't need to. And I'm convinced that if you keep a Disco 2 running cool, you probably won't have to deal with head gaskets. The other big factor, and this one's a big one, is these engines are aluminum and they have steel sleeves that are basically pressed into the cylinders. And if these cylinders get too hot, those sleeves will slip out and make an awful tapping, clunking, clicking noise, and could be the end of your motor. So really important to keep these engines cool, like critical. Let's talk about the temperatures that you should be seeing on your ultra gauge. I live in the hot desert Southwest in Arizona. So we see temperatures, last summer was like 115 degrees for 3 months straight. This summer hasn't been so bad, but you know, we're talking 100+ degree Fahrenheit temperatures here. Now, when I'm running around town in the middle of the afternoon on my ultra gauge with my current cooling setup, which we'll talk about, I'm seeing temperatures around the 197 to 208 at a long idle at a light, maybe getting to 210 if I'm really sitting long idle at a light. And I think probably the highest temperature I've ever seen on my Discovery is 215, which relative, compared to any other vehicle, that's really not that bad. But for these, it is. You want to keep them as cool as possible. Now this is during extreme heat. Now every day driving around in like normal temperatures, sub 100 degrees, let's say in the 70s, low 80s, I'm seeing consistently a high of probably 197, 55 to 60 mile an hour, I'm seeing at about 188. Never getting into the 200 range, I don't think ever really. In low 80s, mid 70s. And then below that, it's pretty consistent, stays around that same area. So this is my experience, just to give you some idea. So if you're seeing 215 at any point when it's 75 degrees outside, there's maybe something wrong. Another thing, obvious thing, that you can do to keep your Discovery 2 cool is to make sure your cooling system is in proper working order. These trucks are old, there's a lot of components in the cooling system. You've got radiators that could be bad, you've got hoses that could be bad, leaking, you've got a throttle body heater that really tends to leak, you've got a fan clutch that could go out, you've got a water pump that's probably aged and not moving water anymore, thermostat that may not be functioning correctly. So it's important to go through the whole thing, check all these components out, and make sure they're all working correctly. But the one thing you don't want to do immediately is just go buy a thermostat. You see, in these trucks, the thermostat matters. In any other vehicle, a thermostat is effectively a switch, telling the cooling system to kick on, start flowing water to the radiator, start cooling the engine. Once the engine reaches a certain temperature, that switch closes and it's no longer circulating through the radiator. Simple. In a Discovery 2, it's not so simple. This is what the thermostat looks like. This is a housing. Thermostat is inside of here, and it's kind of funky. It's not an artificial heart valve. That's kind of what it looks like. The important thing is to get a 180-degree thermostat, but not just any 180-degree thermostat. And it really needs to be this very one. I can actually read you the part number, PA66GF30. This is actually a Land Rover part. I believe it is the thermostat for a Freelander, a diesel Freelander, something like that. But this is called the Soft Spring Gray 180-degree thermostat. It costs over $80, so it's not cheap. But when I put this in my Discovery, it dropped my temperatures by 10 degrees. I was pretty amazed. I didn't think a thermostat really could make that big of a difference, but it did. So that's probably the third thing I would do. Number one, get an ultra gauge. Number two, make sure the cooling system is working correctly. And number three, I would get this gray thermostat, the Soft Spring thermostat. And I think you can get them at Lucky 8, probably Atlantic British. There's probably several places you can get them. You'll know it because it'll be around 80 bucks. The other option is you can get an inline thermostat. Now this is like a modification that you make. If you go to inlinethermostats.com, you can see it there. It's a nice kit, and I think it was about as much as that thermostat. It's not terribly expensive. It pretty much has the same effect as the Land Rover Gray thermostat, except I feel like it reacts a little bit faster. Like it cools down faster, it heats up faster, but it's more, it feels more stable, but not by much. It's not a big dramatic difference. But the inline thermostat does have a few advantages. One advantage is you have a standard thermostat now. It's just, the little thermostat that you would see in any other vehicle. You can buy one anywhere. So that's nice. It's also right at the top of the cooling system. It's really easy to get to. And it also eliminates that plastic T-fitting that can break and crack on your stock cooling system. So the inline option is pretty nice. I have switched to the inline and I like it. I'm keeping it. I have both, but I prefer the inline system. A few other things to look for on the cooling system is the fan clutch. Spin it. If it keeps spinning after you give it a whack, just when the engine's obviously not running, if it spins freely, then your fan clutch is no good. And the fan clutch is a little tricky on these 03 and 04 models. It's like a one-piece deal and it's pretty expensive. But if you have a Discovery 2 prior to 03, it's a two-piece deal where you can just buy the clutch and you don't have to buy the fan, which is nice. Another thing, just again, make sure the water pump is good. Not a real good way to test for that. They typically end up weeping or leaking if they're not good. So keep an eye out for that. Another good way to protect your cooling system and keep from overheating is to get an aluminum expansion tank for your coolant, the coolant reservoir. There's a few of them out there. They're getting harder to find, but having an aluminum expansion tank kind of gets rid of the risk of a plastic expansion tank cracking. Say you're on a freeway road trip, you're not paying attention to your ultra gauge, your tank cracks, dumps all your coolant out, you're gonna overheat, and you don't want that. So it's just a good safeguard against another potential way of overheating. One thing you're gonna notice in the summertime, running around with your air conditioning on, your temperatures are gonna be significantly higher, like maybe up to 10 degrees higher. Make sure that the electric condenser fan on the front is working properly. And even when it is, your temperatures are going to be higher. especially when you're sitting at a traffic light idling with the AC on and it's 110 out. That thing's gonna get hot. You're gonna wanna get moving as soon as possible. Okay, so some quick tips about keeping your Discovery cool. Because even if you do get the right thermostat, even if you do everything right, you're still gonna run into situations where you see that ultra gauge start creeping up, and you're gonna be looking down at that gauge like I was, looking down all the time. I still am, I do it all the time. So long idle. The Discovery 2 does not do well at long idle in the heat. It just doesn't. And the problem is that fan, that mechanical fan, is not turning fast enough. The water pump is not turning fast enough. So as you're sitting there in your McDonald's drive-thru, you're gonna see that number start creeping, higher and higher and higher. There is something you can do about that while you're sitting in that drive-thru, and that is just put it in neutral. It'll idle a little bit faster, and that tends to bring the temperatures down a little bit. If it doesn't, then you can give it a little bit of gas, bring it up to about 1,000 RPM, and just kind of hold it there, and that temperature will start to come down because you're moving that coolant, you're moving that fan. So if you get stuck in a situation where you have to idle for a long time, just put it in neutral and you don't have to rev it. Just give it about 1,000 to 1,200 RPM, and it'll bring the temperature down. Another situation where you'll see temperatures creep up occasionally is when you're off-roading, because you're not moving very fast. Maybe you're going downhill, you're idling a lot. You're gonna see that temperature rise for the same reason as you would sitting in a drive-thru. So the trick here isn't that much of a trick. I just tend to run my truck in 4 low if I'm off-roading, or I lock it into a gear if I'm in 4 high. That way you're revving that engine just a little bit more, and you're getting that fan, and you're getting that water pump cranking away and moving water and air. Another situation you'll find yourself in is if you're going up a long highway grade, real steep hill, you're moving about 70, you're gonna see those temperatures go up really fast. And the key here is turn the air conditioning off, assuming you have it on. If you turn the AC off, you'll see the temperatures drop way down to a more reasonable level really quickly too. And then the nice part is when you're on the other side of that hill, you can resume the AC and be nice and cool in the cabin again.